Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Christ MotoGP podcast. Balaton Park is in the books. Plenty to discuss from the weekend where, safety might have been the the key talking point, but we did actually get an interesting Grand Prix compared to the sprint because, let's be honest, the sprint was fairly diabolical. It was quite predictable, but the Grand Prix in the early stages definitely offered something that was quite surprising, I thought. But then, if you haven't seen, I'm not going to spoil the result for you, but you can maybe hazard a guess who's won both races. Marc Marquez, 7 in a row in the Grand Prix, 14 wins in a row. If you combine both sprint and Grand Prix, 3 months unbeaten. I mean, 175-point lead. Yeah, not much else to say about Mark. He's been fairly consistent, you can put it that way. He's been very consistent the past 3 months, and yeah, he takes one more giant step towards the world title. We'll get into that and when he can win it later in the podcast. But joining me, Jordan Moran, to discuss the weekend as a whole is Pete McLaren and Lewis Duncan. Pete, what do you make of Balaton Park? It was really good for the lower classes in terms of the action that we got on Sunday. Obviously, the safety concerns, that scary incident with the cameraman on Saturday with Pedro Acosta's bike nearly taking him out. But the circuit, maybe surprised in terms of how it was, because it was quite different for World Superbike, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, visually to look at, it's almost a bit Mazzano-like. I thought, watching it on TV. Yeah, stop and go as we sort of thought, very tight, very twisty. As you say, for the smaller classes, especially Moto 3, it suited them quite well. But yeah, difficult to I think wrestle a MotoGP bike round there. And I think also it comes back a bit to what Casey Soner was saying about, or warning about, with reducing the braking zones, isn't it? And how that can affect overtaking, and sort of his fears that if the braking zones get smaller with the 850 bikes, then you have less room to overtake. Well, this was a bit of a sort of a test run, wasn't it, for a circuit with small braking zones? And we did see that the Premier class bikes especially struggled to sort of make passes. Not all of them. There were some passes. I think Jorge Martin was made up, I don't know, 12 places or something in the race.
He made 6 up at the first corner. If you watch the helicopter shot, I was saying to Lewis, it's just amazing how he does it. He just takes the perfect line and gets everyone. So, as you say, he proved that it was possible.
Yeah, and I think he was one of those who sort of said, "Look, I love this track; it's great." It obviously suited Mark down to the ground, stopping go corners, anti-clockwise, etc., etc., sort of as most people expected. But yeah, I think ideally the track does need some some bigger straights, some harder braking zones to just allow a bit more passing, because there were times where riders, well, as you say, the sprint really, it was sort of, we were thinking, well, if the Grand Prix is going to be twice as long but the same as this, it's going to be a long afternoon. But Mark made it interesting, didn't he, if you like, by getting past in those first few corners, and Bez doing his best, and really do very well to hold him off. He didn't really have the pace, did he? But he did a great job with with the track position and everything else to come out with the podium, and Acosta obviously up there as well. So the race was better, I think, than a lot of us feared. And as far as the safety side, I mean, being so slow, there wasn't really a danger to the riders as such. But as you say, we did see a danger to the cameramen, which, I mean, that's a danger really for everyone. Photographers, of course, anyone on the service road, it's a risk. Remember someone telling me years ago, if a bike's coming towards you, don't run, lie down behind a barrier, because it can happen if you're out there by the service road. So that was a really graphic example of of the dangers, isn't it, that those camera guys face. And good on Acosta, wasn't it, for going to see the cameraman and everything else, and just checking he was okay. So yeah, Balaton Park, first one in the books. I hope, we did hear that there might be some talk about trying to make the track a bit better for overtaking next year somehow. Don't really know what they can do. Maybe they can get rid of some of the chicanes and things like that. I'm not really sure, but yeah, it was. There's certainly a lot of corners and a lot of slow corners, so just a bit of variety. But at the same time, we did see some overtaking, and we did see some decent racing on the Sunday, I think.
Yeah, we'll come on more to the safety aspect after. I think the Enea Bastianini crash was one that terrified me, and it was one that I thought could happen. Yeah, it was at a slowish speed, but when you see a rider sliding across the track and you see Enea actually look and thinking, shit, they're coming towards me, and they just like parted and they got around him, thankfully. But yeah, that is what worried me. And also, as you said with Acosta, it was nice to see him actually meet the cameraman and stuff. I think he gave him a signed niece letter and he gave him a tour of the box as well. And even after in the race yesterday, he kind of gave him the sort of heart sign to the camera and he gave him the thumbs up as he was going past, which was quite nice, I guess. But yeah, there's still things about this circuit that I really didn't like in terms of the racing, but you can't have it perfect everywhere, but we'll get into that later in the podcast. I suppose we get into the track action, gents. Lewis, Mark, like I say, the intro, 7 in a row now, 175-point lead. Title's right there. I mean, even he's starting to talk about it, which is like, you hear him in the press conference say, yeah, when I wrap up the title, it's going to be straight on to 26, which I don't know what fulfills you with dread or fear with everyone else, but I think there's a, expectation that he's going to do it for the next 3 rounds, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean we've seen once again that there was an opportunity for someone to challenge Mark, and then they just never did it. We saw on Friday Pedro Acosta was really quick. It looked like really the two of them, Pedro and Mark, were a clear step ahead of everyone. Not just on race pace, but on single lap times as well. There was a good gap between the top two and then third place and the rest of the field, which behind them it was quite tight. And Acosta makes a really silly mistake in qualifying, which, on a circuit where overtaking is at a premium, he's really, put the nail in his coffin before the racing's even begun. And again, Mark's kind of been left unchallenged. We saw in the Grand Prix that, Marco Bezzecchi did a really good job of, running at the front from when he did, but the Mark had the pace, more pace than anyone else. And a circuit like this, left-handed circuit where we know Mark's strong, you can't give him an inch, and they gave him 3.5 miles to play with, and arguably the best we've seen of him all season, the most dominant I think we've seen of him all season, just in terms of when he got out front ahead of Bez after 11 laps and instantly put 1.5 seconds between himself and you consider as well, Bez at one point was about 1.2, 1.3 clear Marquez, so in the space of 6-7 laps, he's overturned about 3, nearly 4 seconds. So what can you do to challenge that? And we're now seeing this whole idea of a win of the championship in Misano is real. It's a very, very realistic prospect. And you look at just the 7 in a row. Nobody's done it since he did it in 2014. Nobody had won 6 in a row with 2 different manufacturers. So now he set even more of a benchmark. And on the points alone of the last 7 rounds, he'd still be leading the championship by 10 points. It's these kind of ridiculous sort of statistics that what can you do? Sorry, the Grand Prix points alone, you would still be leading the championship rather than over the last 6 rounds, he would be second in the championship and not very far away from the lead either. So there is no real reality this season. There's no eventualities. There's no alternate universes where Marquez isn't just wiping the floor, because they just haven't been good enough. And I made this tweet yesterday after the race that hands down this has been the best season ever for a rider, single season performance, but equally it's got to be one of the worst in terms of his rivals. Pecco Bagnaia challenge didn't materialise. Alex Marquez sent Assen, and at all the other points this season when he did drop the ball, he dropped it hard.
Yeah.
And then every weekend we've seen where there might be someone who's quick. Austria, we thought Pecco was going to be there, didn't happen. We saw, a couple of races now Bez has led but hasn't been able to get it across the line for one reason or another. You've seen Acosta was quick in Hungary and it didn't happen. There's just nobody right now good enough. There's not a rider, manufacturer, pairing. There's nothing good enough right now to beat Marquez. And I think, he talks about this being not normal. I think this is the new normal for everyone.
It's hard to say for me for that. I think it's like he kind of is so surprised himself as well, because Marquez, yes, but he does this thing, and I think that he he could play a mind trick on you where he would tell you that he's won 14 races in a row, but he would convince you that he's not the quickest. Like, he does this thing where it's like, I don't believe it anymore. And it's like, but he convinces himself that, Lewis. And I think that's why he just kind of keeps himself at a level where he's like, I can keep winning here if I just keep telling myself this.
I think what it is that he's reluctant to talk like he used to because of the injury thing. He's obviously he said this before a few rounds ago. Someone asked him what you're scared of the most, and he said injuring myself. So there's clearly that, but there does become a point where you're listening to him say, this is impossible, and the rivals are getting close, and it's, they can't keep this run going. You did it before, and arguably you're a better rider now than you were, 11 years ago. So, it talks about weak circuits. It's just, we are at a point now where we're seeing a completely different Marc Marquez to what we've ever seen before, and arguably a more dominant and more competitive and just better all-round rider than we've ever seen before. And, I think, you can't call this not normal anymore. This has been since early June. Nothing has changed. And I don't see...
It could have been earlier than that, to be
changing.
honest. If he didn't crash out of those races.
And really, Silverstone's been the only circuit this year that has been a genuine outlier. And of all the circuits on the calendar that are his weak ones with fast right-hand corners, it's that was the only one. The rest of them have been, weak circuits, strong circuits, doesn't matter. There is no weak circuit for Marc Marquez anymore.
No, and it was such a terrible weekend for him at Silverstone. He only finished second and third. It's like the worst thing about it all. And you just think, wow. Like, I seen a funny thing where someone said that when he crashed at that first, obviously before the red flag came out, and he hit the barriers, obviously he took a little bump in his head, like through the little like padded things. Someone said that knocks some sense into him, and he's never looked back since. But yeah, Pete, what do you make of it? For me, when someone dominates like this, I am a big fan of motocross, and I've seen Jet Lawrence go unbeaten in an outdoor season, and it doesn't surprise me, because Jet is an unbelievable talent, and it reminds me so much of this, where a rider who, we seen it yesterday, as you both have said, he gets out of position at the start, and then when he just wants to, he can just rip a lap out, and you're like, where did that even come from? And then he does it for 3 in a row, like 3 laps, and then he builds up his gap and he's gone. It's weird to see it in modern MotoGP, because maybe we've been so used to the championship battles of recent years being so close with mistakes and stuff, that Marquez has came back to when let's just bring it back how it used to be, sort of thing. And it's a shock to the system almost when you haven't really seen it for so long, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and I think confidence is a big part of it, isn't it? Mark's always been a confidence rider. At Honda, he always believed in himself, didn't he? And I think the injury really knocked his confidence, in the sense that when he came back, suddenly he had a bike where even he couldn't win on it on certain days. And I think that did take a knock for him. And he spoke this weekend a lot, because obviously everyone was asking, well, why are you so far ahead of everyone? And, why are people struggling? Why is Pecco struggling? Why is the other guys? Said, look, they're lacking confidence. I think he also brought up Jorge Prado, the example of him. And he said, look, it was like me previous years when I lost that confidence. You just lose a tiny bit of performance in each braking zone, and then that's a couple of tenths a lap, and to raise yourself back to that level where you're just on an absolute high, as he is at the moment, as you say, Jet Lawrence, Ricky Carmichael was another guy, perfect season, wasn't he? When they have that winning streak going and everything's just falling into place, it's almost like they can do no wrong, isn't it? And it's very hard to beat people when you're like that, but it's also very hard to get to that stage, isn't it? And Mark's it's been a long journey to get back to this level that he was at in 2019. In terms of who might have been his challenges on Sunday, as you guys say, he didn't materialise from Acosta. He was the main guy. Fermin Aldeguer at the end of the race again was the only guy lapping at the speed of Marquez, half a second quicker than the field. Not saying he would have beaten him, but it was shaping up for another repeat of Austria, where he could have been the nearest rival. Digia having the bike problem, having been second to Marquez in the sprint, that was another shame again. I don't see anyone beating Mark on Sunday, but certainly there were other rivals that could have been in that podium battle. And that's shame for those guys. Bastianini, of course, best qualifying of the year, 4th on the grid, and doesn't even finish the opening laps of either race. So Yeah, it could have been closer, at least for the podium. There could have been more of a battle, if you like, when he lost that position on the first lap of the Grand Prix. He might have had a few other guys that he needed to get past, but ultimately, like you're saying, when everything's working for you, it's almost like just everything goes your way, and everyone's struggling already to just match your pace, and you just seem to avoid all the problems that other people are having. And Mark's just, he could walk on water on the moment. I should imagine he feels that way, but like you say as well, he is consciously trying to keep that confidence from going into overconfidence, isn't he?
Yeah.
Because he knows it's a fine line, and but everyone is really. You can almost see at Ducati, it's almost taken for granted now, isn't it? With this title lead that Mark's got, it's almost like the focus is now more on let's sort Bagnaia out, because this is the outlier, isn't it? No matter what bike you're on, the teammates need to be closer together, and that's something that obviously Bagnaia's got to sort out. It's also something Ducati got to sort out, and we're seeing inconsistent form from Digia, from Pecco. Mark's the only guy who's up there every week, and it's almost like, look, the title's there now. We know that's sorted. Now we need to address this issue of what do we do with the other guys on this bike, and make the bike better, because as we're seeing, the Aprilia's getting better, Martin's getting better as well on it, the KTM's up there every week, so maybe they're already starting to think a little bit about next year and beyond.
Maybe they are, yeah, and I just think with the title situation, just to mention that Ducati can wrap up the constructors next round as well, and then they can wrap up. I think the team's championship could be secured as well with the factory team. Obviously, the question I want to ask you both: when do you think Mark's going to wrap this up by? Is it going to be Mazzano? But he needs, like I say, 47 points. He needs to outscore Alex by in the next 2 rounds. I mean, it's not out of the window, because Alex's point average has dipped so much. But I do think that Alex will be strong at Barcelona. He was very strong there at the end of season test last year. Lewis, when do you think it's going to be? Personally, I think it'll be Japan, but I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts on it.
I don't see any reason why it can't be Mazzano anymore. I mean, you talk about Alex Marquez. I would have expected him to be fast in Austria. I would expect him to, there was, penalties and stuff, but that's been the problem there, is that Alex has made mistakes. He made another one this weekend with a really stupid, needless, impeding penalty in practice, when a rider like that, who's been racing in MotoGP a long time now, should know what the game is, and then he's worst qualifying this season. I mean, and crashes in the Grand Prix, and you talk about well, this is impossible, why not? But like I say, the rivals just haven't been there to challenge Mark and to keep him in check. And we talk about Catalonia being a weak circuit for Mark. He was on the podium there both Catalonia events last year.
Yeah.
We're talking about, if we're talking about weakness, we're talking about something that is, very, very, it's a few tenths. It's not, I'm going to go there and finish 15th. We'll see what happens. Of course, we've seen mistakes before from Marquez, but those kind of look to have been well eradicated. I mean, Sunday was quite a good example of that kind of contact in the first corner. Lucky to get away with it, but then equally, he knew how to get his head down. He knew he had the pace. He knew how to manage that situation. There wasn't this sort of, like we saw at Jerez, for example, this urgent rush to try and get back up into a position quickly because he was concerned about, someone ahead of him pulling away. He knew very much how to navigate it. So his rivals keep making mistakes. He doesn't. There's nothing to say that Alex Marquez doesn't drop the ball these next couple of rounds, and Mark isn't world champion in Mazzano. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, his rivals don't deserve this to be prolonged. They deserve it to. He's earned it to be wrapped up at the soonest possible point, because they just haven't done a good enough job. To delay it any further is kind of an unearned mercy, I think, for the likes of Alex Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia.
Yeah, get the Barcelona Mark might only win by 1 second instead of 3, so that might be the only weakness that he has. I think at this point you're looking at it. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that the consensus is, Pete, I haven't seen, maybe I was only 2 years old when Mick Doohan was winning in the 90s, and it's like he used to wrap up the title by obviously there was a shorter season, there was 16 rounds and it was much more of a spread calendar, but he used to wrap it up in the summertime, and you'd see him at Donington at round 11 and he had won the title. It feels like that. I don't know, I can't explain it. It just feels like this is so odd for the modern day MotoGP to have a winner so early, especially with the point system the way it is.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, we sort of got used to it going right down to the wire, and riders talking about, normally we'd be at this stage of the season, everyone's saying, "Oh, it's too early to even think about the title," isn't it? That's what we've been hearing from, if you like, Pecco and Martin and Quattro. Everyone's used to going right down to the last few rounds, and here we are already sort of just gone midsummer, and it's pretty much when's he going to win it? So yeah, I mean, on paper, his rivals should be closer at the next two tracks, but again, getting closer, you don't get different points for being closer, do you? So you get points unless you beat him, and it's hard to see really Marc being beaten at the moment. But yeah, I mean, on paper, Alex should go better at Barcelona. The Aprilia should go better, but although whether the changes, sometimes when the bike goes better at stop-go track, it loses its strengths at Barcelona. But let's see there. KTM, Acosta's coming up. But in terms of the championship, obviously Alex is the nearest guy, so he's the focus there. As Mark says, he hopes it doesn't get wrapped up at Misano, because that means his brother's going to have a disaster at the next two rounds. So he certainly doesn't want it. I don't know. I think I would go more with Japan for me. I think it's going to go on, but let's see. You never know what can happen. Certainly, it was Alex needs to start scoring big points again if he's going to delay it. But then, if you're Alex, really, I think the focus is not on Mark, is it? It's never really been on the title. It's
behind you, isn't it?
Yeah. So he's coming out of these. He's had two poor weekends, but then the guy he's racing for second in the championship has also had two bad weekends, and then they've got Bez coming up. So really, that's what we're going to be left with, isn't it? Once this title, which is already really a formality, is decided, it's going to be who's best of the rest.
Exactly, and people straight into that with you about Aprilia and their weekend. Bezzecchi third again, and it's just consistently on the podium now. It's just really refreshing to see the consistency come through with Aprilia. But the big talking point really is Martin, isn't it? With his a fantastic ride, to be honest. I think that maybe even caught him by surprise how well he went, and he differed on tyre choice to Bezzecchi, and it really paid off at the end, because you see his pace, and he talked about that he could see Bezzecchi, and he was like, "Oh, do I risk it?" And he went, "No, I'll settle for P4." But then straight after, he's already thinking about the next step, which is obviously podiums. A really good weekend for Aprilia, considering that maybe the track layout on paper shouldn't have really suited them.
No, that's right. It's the stop go thing. But we saw Bez competitive in Austria, and when Martin didn't really have a great weekend, did he? And you're thinking this might take him a bit longer than perhaps he thought to sort of be competitive on the bike. But yeah, a really great weekend for him, as you say, in Hungary. Fastest Aprilia in a couple of sessions, wasn't he? It wasn't just the race where it came good. He was faster than Bez on Friday. Was he third in the warm-up as well? So he's getting there. He's building his confidence. I think he said he can feel the confidence coming back. He can feel that he's still the rider that he was before all these injuries as well. So, we were just talking about confidence with Marquez, and Martin is building that confidence now. So, yeah, it's a matter of time, isn't it, before he's racing with Bez in the races, let's say, and for the podium. And I think these next couple of races we could see that happen. The timeline is moving forward, but he needs to sort out the qualifying. He's going through the same sort of journey that Bez had at the start of the year, isn't he? Where he's quick in the race, but he's got to pull off, as you were saying, those amazing first laps to give himself a chance. Well, you can do that every now and then, but you don't want to be doing it every week. So that's the next step that he needs to make, because the race pace is there. So if he can get the qualifying sorted, then he's in that podium mix as well. So yeah, amazing to think. Just what was it, a month or two ago, he was trying to leave Aprilia. I mean,
it's funny old world, isn't it? How
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Lewis, what do you make of the Aprilias this weekend? Obviously, Friday was a really, how can I say, it kind of went up in smoke. Really did, actually, with both, but with Martin and Fernandez having engine problems in, the first 10 minutes of practice, and you thought, is it really going to be one of these weekends for Aprilia? But they really did regroup, as Pete said, and interesting how Bezzecchi suits the soft rear in the Grand Prix, and Martin goes medium and maybe tries to think it's more of a gamble, but really the bikes could have ended up at the same part of the track anyway. What was it, 2.4 seconds or something separated them at the ends? Pete says if Martin can start qualifying better, and he was really unlucky not to get into Q2, what was it, 1,000th of a second on the Friday, which was so close. He is in a good place, isn't he, heading into these next 2 rounds?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think the tyre thing between the two Aprilia riders is, is slightly circumstantial. Bez said he just didn't feel like he had the pace on the medium to do anything, and obviously when you're in a position where you're in the front row, you've kind of got to go for it and see what happens, which is what we saw Bez do. I think Martin, he's still very much in this adaptation phase, so there are going to be these moments where there are going to be dips in form, like we saw in the qualifying. He was pretty rapid on Friday, but then dropped 17th on the grid. So that we saw that early season with Bez, that when it came to the time attack, the Aprilia needed, it needed a bit of adjustment to kind of get your head around compared to what you're used to on the Ducati. And I think that's what we're seeing from Martin now. The bike's obviously better than it was back then, but it's still very much a different riding style compared to the Ducati. So, that's going to take him a few rounds to get to. And if all the circuits are trying and master that, I don't think Balaton Park was the best one anyway, just given how stop and go it is. And as you say, Jordan, not really on paper a good circuit kind of layout for Aprilia. But, it very much kind of went like Austria did. They come to a circuit, not great for them, don't have the best of Fridays, but then they're able to really turn it around. And I think that says a lot about the Aprilia bike right now, is that it seems to be quite a rider friendly bike. They seem to be able to throw changes at it that do unlock quite a lot of performance rather than kind of incremental steps.
It's going more towards the 22, I think, the way it used to be when Espargaro had a really good run that year.
Yeah, and clearly I think that helps Martin as well in his adaptation from a Ducati style to an Aprilia style, because they're able to throw changes at the bike and they clearly make noticeable differences to him every single time he gets on the machine. So, that's, as much as Martin's riding deserves credit, I think Aprilia deserves a lot of credit for the job that they've done so far and that they are doing. And yeah, I'm excited to see what Martin can do over the next few rounds. You get to Misano, should be, a good circuit for Aprilia and a good circuit for him. We know he goes well around Barcelona, and the Aprilia goes well around Barcelona. So really, we are getting towards that podium phase. And I think had he qualified higher, he probably would have been able to get, at least a bit closer than he was to Bez, and he wasn't that far off either, because the pace difference was 0.02 of a second per lap.
It's nothing really. Yeah.
And you put that into context that Martin was coming from 16th on the grid and doing a lot of overtaking. So to have that average pace differential when Bez had 2 people overtake him, and that was his race was pretty lonely at that point. I think that's, for me, is the real kind of the key to take away from that race, was that fix that qualifying, and he does have the pace to be on terms with Bez already, and that's only going to be a good thing for Aprilia, because we know how good a job Bez has done this year. So with Martin up there being competitive as well, that's exactly what they need going into next year as well, when realistically at the end of this rules cycle, when clearly the Ducati has not advanced as much as we maybe thought, there is an opportunity there for Aprilia to be much more of a consistent front runner next year. So yeah, I think there's only good things in the future for Martin and Aprilia right now.
Yeah. I suppose you look at the other side, but you'd be quite cynical here with Bezzecchi. He's been 2 races in a row on the Sunday where he started really well, and he had a really, out the gates, really fast pace, but then talked about in Austria, he didn't want to say what the issue was at the end, where he lost a lot of time, but kind of similar here. Is there, I suppose it's a good thing, because the bike's still on the podium, but could have been better actually for Bezzecchi, because he still seems quite annoyed with the second half of the race. It seems that there's something missing there, isn't there, with the Aprilia?
Yeah. As you say, that the tyre choice sort of mixes things up, doesn't it? With Sunday's race. So we don't, it wasn't exactly an even comparison. So maybe if Bez could have made the medium work, which is obviously down to him and his crew to get that sort of rear braking performance that he was lacking and sent him towards the soft, maybe that could have helped him in the second half of the race. Yeah, Austria, we still don't know. Could it have been fuel? Could it have been overheating or something else? We don't know. But yeah, I think with Bez, he did a great job, given that he didn't have that sort of pace. He didn't have the pace really to be there, and he made the most of it. So I think in that regard, yeah, he needs to find more pace, because he's also got Acosta coming up to challenge him. He's got his own teammate now pushing him. Mark is still clearly ahead. There's other guys that have the speed, like Aldeguer, as we're saying, and Didier on his day. So he needs to sort of respond speed-wise. But at the same time, he's doing a great job of sort of damage limitation on the days when he doesn't have that raw speed. And as he said, I think he said he knew he didn't have the speed, and he was quite sort of angry, because he thought he was going in with no chance. And then they were able to sort of find him more performance during the weekend, because Friday was a bit of a nightmare for him, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it's all going to depend on really how he starts it. If he can start the weekend more strongly, maybe that means he can finish the race on Sunday more strongly. But let's see. And as you guys are saying, having Martin competitive should also, he can feed off that. If Martin finds something, well, I'm sure they'll find something from the data from the race this weekend, and they'll go, there's something that we can try in Barcelona. So it's going to help Bez as well, having someone of Martin's quality fast on the same bike now as well, given that he's been doing it alone, hasn't he, this year, really? So they can both, and that's what Aprilia will hope, obviously, feed off each other.
Yeah, that's a good point. It really is. And I suppose you can kind of turn that into Pedro Acosta as well. I think KTM now, since summer break, just before it, there's been a real, what's the word I'm looking for? Collective. They're all on the same bike now. When you look at it, they're all in the same direction. And it really shows. I think even Pol Espargaro being quick this weekend. Yes, of course he's tested here previously, but still to finish inside the top, 8? For Pole, and Brad Binder to be inside there as well, and obviously Anaya having his struggles. It's a weekend of what could have been for Anaya, but Pedro Acosta, I thought, was brilliant yesterday. He was shocking on Saturday, and it really cost his weekend. I mean, he should have been. Really this weekend he should be P2 when you look at it. It's a missed opportunity not to get a sprint podium, but unlucky to get caught up in that Quattararo stuff in the sprint, but still, he shouldn't have been out of place. And I think when you do that, you run the risk, and that's what happens. But it's been quite impressive, hasn't it, Lewis, with the turnaround? We're seeing KTM now just have this consistency that I can't really remember the last time they had that in a season across a multiple string of bikes. It's promising, and it's good to see Acosta get back to that 2024 form, isn't it?
Yeah, again, it's quite hard to sort of understand where it is in terms of genuine form, because I think Pedro himself said the layout of the circuit really suited his riding style, and with the updates they brought to the Aprilia, the KTM, in Austria, he's able to kind of make that next step himself. But Bastian Inigo's, to his credit, was quick there. We didn't really get to see the full potential because of a couple of incidents in both races, but the KTM one's always hard to kind of gauge where it is at, really. It'd be interesting when we get to Barcelona, which, has always kind of produced sort of mixed kind of results for KTM over the years. So I think that'll be a more representative kind of barometer as to where KTM is, certainly relative to Aprilia. I think where we should be looking rather than where it is to Ducati right now. But yeah, I mean, Acosta is, like I said, he threw his weekend away with that qualifying. Otherwise, had he been able to get a lap together, which, minimum he was looking like front row from the pace we saw on Friday. He had the pace to run and fight with Marquez, and we know in that situation when you're facing your first race when, it's been a tough season, Pedro would have probably fought a lot harder with Marquez, and maybe Marquez would be willing to kind of, resist against when he's in the position he's in. So yeah, I think one of the better opportunities in Acosta's short career for a win went walking away in Hungary. But yeah, he's clearly happier on the bike, and we're seeing that it's now a much more consistent top 5 kind of finisher. So KTM needs to keep that going. We're still not 100% convinced about the direction the project's going in over the next few years. Even with the satellite team and potential buyouts, and KTM has obviously managed to keep a hold of Acosta for next year, but how long is he going to be patient with them with the view to 2027? So, yeah, the next few months are going to be pretty crucial, I think, for that particular relationship. But certainly, it's on in the right direction right now.
Yeah, it is, and it's quite funny during the weekend with KTM that obviously all these Red Bull split talks or rumours were coming out there, and Pit Barrow just goes, "Oh no, we've renewed the deal with Red Bull," and it was just like, and that's the end of that. So there you are, Red Bull are staying with KTM, and Pete, just onto the riders and more onto the Acosta side. I think his side of the team have made real gains with the feeling that he has with the front. It's really noticeable compared to the first half of the year. I think that I was reading a few things, and I think he's tried out some new forks, and just a thing that's really brought back a feeling with him. He's got this real special ability. I've noticed it the past few weekends. You get rekindled with it. Like, there it is again. He's got this unique style where it just suits the bike, and it went missing in the first half. But surely he could be thinking that if an opportunity arises, he can be the one that can snatch a win, because we don't know what Mark's going to do. If Mark suddenly relaxes and he just thinks, you know what, let's have a bit of fun, it might bring Acosta into the fore, mightn't it?
It might, yeah. I mean, we saw in one of the practice sessions, wasn't it? Was it Acosta tried to overtake Mark into turn one, and Mark looked over, and we're thinking, this is great. This is what's going to happen in the race or something. And then, as you guys were saying, we were robbed of it with the qualifying and crash for Acosta. Yeah, such a shame, because I mean, yeah, only 2 Ducatis in the top 8 on Sunday, weren't there? And 3 KTMs. And Binder obviously lost out. Acosta's teammate lost out in that qualifying exactly the same time as Digia, but slower second time. So, he then starts 13th on the grid and that kind of thing. The track was obviously working for them, for KTM. It's just helping them build. I think Pit Barrow said that Danny Pedrosa was a big help in this, because they were pushing for these upgrades, weren't they? I think from Aragon that Acosta's wanted these upgrades on the bike, and Danny was kind of the one that went, right, let's just be sure, that we've got everything right with this and how to use them and everything else before we introduce them. And so there's been this sort of Acosta wanting these upgrades because he felt an improvement at the Aragon test, and then he now understands that why they were waiting, and they put them on the bike, and it's been an improvement now at two tracks. Okay, admittedly 2 pretty similar tracks, so now we have to wait and see when we go to a much more flowing circuit how they'll perform there. The suspension, as you say, KTM of course the only team not using Olin suspension.
Olin's.
So they use their own WP in house, so which can work for you or against you, can't it? You can have it completely. Obviously, they can make it completely to suit the bike, but at the same time they don't have all the data from all of the other bikes. So it sounds like they had something with the forks, as you're saying, and then but with the accidents, Acosta damaged those forks, didn't he? So I don't know exactly whether he was able to race with them on Sunday or not, or whether they had to go back to the standard one, should we say. But yeah, they're clearly working in all areas, and whatever it is, as we're seeing, even with the Ducati, once you get a package that works for your rider, that's what matters, isn't it? No matter what it is, it just needs to work for them. If they've got that confidence, that feeling in the front, which is such a major thing in motorbike racing anywhere, they seem to find it with Acosta, and for KTM's sake, they'll hope they can keep it. But and we all hope, for the sake of the racing, that Acosta can qualify a bit better and put on a battle with Marc, because I think we've been waiting to see that for since he came into MotoGP, haven't we? And I think probably Marc's been waiting for it, and it hasn't happened. Marc's always praised Acosta's talent, and let's hope that he's now getting the bike that will allow him to show that talent.
Yeah, I like the kind of the needle with those two. Like when you see those little unseen videos and like the podium and stuff, they're like, they talk to each other, but there's a bit of like, yeah, let's have a battle soon. I love it. I hope. That's why I hope when Marquez wraps it up, he just kind of goes, right, bring it on. Come on, we'll have a fight here, because he wants to have fun. He loves to show, Mark. So yeah, I hope Pedro's first in line and can get a strike on him. That'll be pretty good. We'll talk about struggles for riders after, but I want to give praise to Luca Marini. Lewis, brilliant weekends. P4 Sprint, P5 Grand Prix. Best result clearly for Honda, and Joan Mir was strong on Saturday. Unfortunately, crashed out in the Grand Prix, but changes with their bike as well has seemingly helped. A new chassis and plenty of testing has went on with Elisa Spargaro recently as Barcelona. He's done it last week or so. Really promising stuff for Honda, isn't it? Because they've now had consistently a good bunch of top tens now, and I think this is showing that this package does work around different circuits.
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of pre-weekend, Honda was one of those manufacturers we were looking at, with the turning of the bike, with the lack of, hard acceleration zones that, they could be in for something pretty good. And even Marc Marquez said on Thursday that he was expecting Honda to be up there. So I think we were all expecting Zarco would be kind of the one to kind of take full advantage of that. And he just had a totally miserable weekend. So, in some ways that was surprising, and it was surprising that maybe the top Honda then was Luca Marini. But to Marini's credit, he's really this season, before the injury and afterwards, really kind of steadily come forward as a Honda rider, and you can understand why they've, the contract situation over the summer did create a bit of a headache for Honda, because his analytical approach into development is something that's been really beneficial to Honda, and to lose that, over, a potential big name, you can understand, the kind of the dilemma there, but equally you can understand why Honda has become such a key figure in the rider market, for obviously certainly at one point for next year, but now, looking to 2027 as well, the tangible steps forward, the bike seems to keep getting better, the results are getting better, they've got great personnel there. They obviously, we'll see over, probably won't be until Valencia time, if not next year, but the effects of Kurt Trieb from KTM is the on the engine side of things. So, it's the first time in a long time we've seen just genuine, tangible steps forward every single weekend for Honda. And, long may it continue, because the championship needs a manufacturer like Honda up there as well. We need, multiple manufacturers fighting at the front, but Honda is such a big name, and everything it's been through over the past few years, a lot of it self-inflicted, with its approach, with its mindset, stuff like that. But, to its credit, they've done a lot of work there to turn things around, and it's bearing fruit. Then you have to wonder as well, given everything that Yamaha has been doing as well in the background, why is the same thing not happening there? I think a lot of, again, we've spoken about this before, a lot has been put on, it's the V4, but, Honda had a V4 for years and couldn't get anything to work out of it.
There's a reason Marc Marquez is on Ducati right now.
And now look at them. So there's something that Honda is doing, whatever Honda is doing, Yamaha needs to really seriously have a good look at and copy, because at one point we thought Yamaha was the manufacturer. They were the one bringing in European technicians to lead things. They were the one throwing parts at the bike and trying new things and beefing up the test team. And Yamaha has not really taken any steps forward since early this season, whereas Honda has just continued this progression. So, that's an intriguing kind of subplot as to what specifically is Honda doing that Yamaha isn't to have seen such a gain.
Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? Pete, when's the last time you remember a Honda looking really nice to ride? Because it actually does when you see it on camera. It's lovely and flowing, and the front end looks so nice on it, which is something that they've always kind of had, and especially at these stop-and-go circuits, the front end has been their real asset. They can turn it and they can really get into the corner. But the work that they've done with, I don't know if it's softening the engine, taking away some of that aggressiveness. The rear's definitely playing ball now, which was not the case for a lot of years, and it's good because seeing Marini up there, and you kind of just sit back. I was watching on Saturday and I went, geez, that's the factory Honda team, fourth and sixth. And you think, that's the way it should be. And I think maybe over the years you kind of get accustomed just to being at the back. But Honda are the greatest brand that we've had in this sport. They will get it right eventually, and it's really good to see.
It is, yeah. As you say, it's taken them a while, isn't it? Longer than people thought to sort of get back to this position. And I think obviously Marc's talent masked a lot of the problems the bike was developing, wasn't it? Or the gap that was developing between the Honda and the top European bikes, and until finally he couldn't mask the gap anymore, and then suddenly it was sort of exposed as to the gap they needed to make up. And as Lewis was saying, initially they didn't seem to be making any progress, did they? They were making management changes and things like that, but it wasn't really having impact. And meanwhile, Yamaha were making the progress, and now it seems to have swung the other way. And Yeah, Marini, I think this is kind of what we expected Marini. I know people criticise Honda when they signed him in place of Marquez, but I think this is what people expected, that he would build sort of steadily and gradually, and he was the right person for the project. It's taken a bit longer than I think people thought, but this is, I think what we're seeing is Lucas showing, as you say, those sort of development skills, his analytical skills, making the right decisions in picking the parts, which is a big thing. The engineers can bring the parts, but then they need the rider to select them, don't they? And sometimes it sounds easy. Well, if it works, it works. But sometimes it needs work to work, if you know what I mean, doesn't it? You don't just put it on and the parts faster. I think this is what we've heard a bit from Mia this weekend about. It was the new chassis, wasn't it? That actually you need to do quite a lot of setup changes to get the improvement from it. So if you just tried it, you might go, oh, well, no, it feels worse and it's slower. But Marini's, looking beyond that and making the changes that then allow you to make a step with that new part. And then once the other Honda riders see that, they then, okay, let's try that as well. I think interesting, or not interesting, but well, if you're Johan Zarco, he's the top Honda rider of the championship, and he didn't have those new parts. And how does he feel about that? Obviously, he's biting his tongue a little bit, but you would want to be also, if you're in that position of the top Honda rider in the championship, getting access to parts that it seems, are working and doing the job from how well the two factory guys went this weekend. So I think Zarco will want those parts. We don't know when he's gonna also get the chance on them. I don't think it's going to be for a couple of races. So again, it's that problem of being a satellite rider, isn't it? Now we're still waiting for the new deal to be confirmed, whether he can get something in his contract, his next contract, that guarantees him access to parts at the same time. I don't know what the situation is there, but it does just show again that even if you're the top rider from your factory, if you're not in the factory team, you're not going to get the new parts first. So yeah, it can work both ways. Sometimes the parts come in, they're not faster, and you've got something that works really well. It's a bit like the 25-24 Ducati situation, isn't it? So it's not a guarantee, but looking at this situation and this weekend, I'm sure Zarco would have liked to have been on the latest parts that Marini and Mir seem to be making work so well.
Because Zarco's form has not been great the past few rounds. It's kind of been a bit up and down, and he already is top of the Christ list, and he's added a few more to that this weekend. So yeah, let's see what happens with Zarco. I don't know if he has something where he agrees that, like, you focus on the bike and I'll just go out and wring the neck of it. Essentially, it might be Zarco's approach, but I think that the return of the factory Honda is definitely starting to build, and I can definitely see the shiny parts going on the factory bike straight away, and then running it, because obviously Honda want to have their factory team there. And I suppose the only thing I can mention about Honda and the rider market, it looks like that we're going to get a new rider next year alongside Zarco at LCR, which is going to be Diogo Moreira from Moto2. I think that's a savvy signing when you read about what way the contract's going to go. It's a 3-year deal, and it looks like it's potentially, if he does well at LCR, he could be promoted into the factory team. So that tells you how much Honda kind of value him, and especially when you hear that Marc Marquez was kind of trying to pitch to Ducati, we need to get this guy. So we do. So there's something there that Honda have seen, and yeah, I'm excited to see how Diogo will go in MotoGP, because he's got incredible talent in terms of his throttle control and how he is in Moto2. He's a real extravagant rider to watch, and I think he's kind of that case where the bigger machinery actually suits him. So let's see how he goes, and when it's confirmed, we'll have that across Christ.net as well. So yeah, we're just waiting on that, and as Pete says, Marini's pretty much signed, but there's been no confirmation yet. So yeah, and of course Jack Miller looks like he's going to be staying at Pramac. So yeah, we're just waiting on all these deals to be confirmed, but it might be Misano, as we have seen that in the past. Right, into riders that had a how can I put it, a bad weekend, and there's one that kind of sticks to the top of that list. I mean, there was optimism yesterday after a P9 for Pecco Bagnaia, where he says it's the first time all season that he's made a step and he can actually feel the front of the bike. I'll have to wait and see how that goes in the next rounds, but yeah, Lewis, that was on par with Silverstone, I think, in terms of just lost, in terms of the start to the finish. I mean, in warm-up yesterday, he nearly punched the screen through. Was he not at Silverstone, where he just, you could see the visible anger that he had, and nothing was going right. But his weekend, he ends it on a positive note, as he says, but his race was a bit scrappy still, wasn't it?
I think it kind of puts into context why he was so angry after Austria, because he came to Hungary on Thursday and said, "Yeah, I knew from the test that this was going to be a really difficult weekend." So, I think in hindsight now we know why there was the reaction there was after Austria, because he knew that there was not going to be any real positives to come from this weekend. And yeah, from the off, he wasn't comfortable. The bike never stopped. The bike never looked competitive. He never looked comfortable. There were a lot of comparisons beginning to be drawn between this and Germany 2023 from Marquez, the weekend where kind of there was a turning point for Marquez's relationship with Honda. I don't think it got to that extreme really, because Sunday Pecco Bagnaia turns up and is all quite happy, with what he'd found. I mean, in these moments when the bike you're lost and the bike just isn't working, is the time when to try just new radical things that maybe you wouldn't beforehand, and that's what Ducati spent the weekend doing. And obviously on Sunday something clicked, because the reason he's ended up with a long lap penalty for shortcutting the chicanes is because he felt so good on the brakes that he ended up overshooting a couple of times because he was just testing the limits. So I'm curious to see what happens in Barcelona now, because that's a good circuit for Pecco, and if he can go there and be genuinely competitive, not necessarily just fighting with Marquez, but just up there, just consistently top 3, podium, comes to the sprint well, gets to the Grand Prix well, then we can kind of probably begin to draw a line under the season now and be like, okay, they've found something now, here's the start point. Now the final 7 rounds or whatever it is will be a test to get on top of things for 2026. So, I imagine there's a lot of optimism in that camp right now for that to be the case. But, it definitely came at the right time as well, because, clearly there are tensions there between Pecco and Ducati management. He said after Austria, running out of patience, and they kind of, Davide Torodzi said during the weekend, we hope Pecco has the right attitude to let us help him. So clearly those comments kind of rankled a little bit. And I don't think Pecco did himself any favours by backtracking on those comments on Thursday either, because if you're in a situation where you're not performing, especially as a world champion, and you genuinely believe that the bike is the problem, then you shouldn't then backtrack saying, "Oh no, I was angry, I shouldn't have said this, blah blah blah," because it puts the onus back on you. It makes you look weak whenever there was a problem, and that's kind of what we saw for most of that weekend, especially during the sprint. You had 2 GP25s in the top 2, and then Pecco was 14th for most of it. And it goes back to those comments. You think, well, you backtracked, so now you're saying that the bike isn't the problem, you're the problem, and that's all anyone now thinks. So yeah, I think there's a lesson here for Pecco about how to play this scenario as well. If the bike is the problem, don't spare anyone's feelings. Obviously there was a conversation had behind the scenes where Ducati probably said, you need to tone this down, but look at Pedro Acosta. Those same conversations were had, but he didn't really tone it down to the point where the bike got better. Yeah. And he got what he wanted out of it. So the only way you can really kind of pressure your manufacturer is to use the media to your advantage and to stand by your comments. So yeah, I think there was a lesson there for Pecco about how to approach this situation, and hopefully going forward they have found a solution, so we don't need to kind of keep going on about whether it's him, is it the bike. But yeah, there's things couldn't have gone much worse up until that point for Pecco.
No, they couldn't have. And you bring up that, I've seen that on social media, people saying this is his Sachsenring 2023. Well, I was looking at that going, it can't be when you have 2 Ducati 25s, first and second in the sprint, as you say. And I think back to that weekend, the Hondas were nowhere, and we were watching literally a rider wreck himself to try and get to the front, which was not pleasant. And I think with Pecco, I think that you say that he needs to portray it better. I think he can't be just going into debriefs and cameras just openly saying, like, as he feels, because then, as you say, he backtracks on it, and that makes him look a bit sort of like come on, like, have a clear stance on this. And I think It's interesting, isn't it, Pete, when you hear the riders say they've made a breakthrough with changes, and I've been reading and listening to a couple of journalists. I've listened to the Paddock Pass podcast. I'll give them a shout out. I mean, they have great insight, and they said about in the debrief that it wasn't even millimeters of change; it was centimeters of change for Pecco. That's how much of a radical change it was. I mean, if you're doing that, you best hope it works. And it seemingly, from his comments, it has, because to make such a radical change like that it's massive, isn't it?
Yeah, it was massive, and it comes back to there's no testing now, is there? If we roll back the clock 10 years or something, Ducati would go right. They would hire a track for private testing, maybe the Balaton Park wing, whichever was your worst track, wouldn't you? And you would just hammer out a whole day running through every possible conceivable setup idea to try and address the problem. But you can't do that. And Ducati don't even have wildcards anymore either. So they can't put Pirro on the bike to try something different that they could then transfer over the same track on the same weekend. So it makes it really difficult when you are trying to catch up to do it. And we've seen with Honda and Yamaha, but they've now got concessions and they're able to do this testing. But it was the perfect storm for Pecco, wasn't it? His problems this weekend. I suppose that's it. In a way, it was better to have a track where he's got there's 17 corners, and most of them are the kind that he doesn't like. So at the moment, the stop go and the hard braking. So at least they did get to work on it, and it kind of got to the point where it was something big needs to change, and they obviously did make that. I think it was Saturday, wasn't it? We then saw with the technical problems in warm-up, he couldn't actually try it again, but then he gets into the race and thinks, you know what, I feel better here. I feel a bit like my old self, and maybe we've got a direction here. But as Lewis was saying, I think it's all about let's wait and see for Barcelona, because we've heard some kind of things in the from both Bagnaia and Digia where they'll have a good weekend or they have a good feeling and they think they found something, but then they go to the next race or one after that and they have problems again. Digi has been up and down quite a lot. It's still confusing in this aspect, in that on the one hand I think they'll say it's details, isn't it? We've heard the word it's just details. Yes. And that's why Digia sometimes is up there and sometimes he isn't. It's just about whether they get the details right on each weekend. But at the same time, we're now hearing Pecco's making these huge changes. So is it details or is it huge changes that are needed? I find it hard to believe that Pecco hasn't gone through all of the small changes by now, with his team. So I think really it has to be big changes. And wait and see. As you were saying, he felt better. He was feeling good. That's obviously a big thing at that particular track on that particular day, but the time is still 14 seconds behind. Take off a few for the long lap, and it's the same margin it was in Austria. So Mark. So it's it all comes down to what happens about, as you say, Barcelona, good track for him, more flowing. Will it work there? Will Digia be up there as well? I think that's the other thing. I mean, what Ducati need is a weekend where actually all three GP25s at some stage are competitive at the same track at the same time, isn't it? And then they've got something more to work off. But I think Jack Appleyard asked Tardozzi during the weekend, is it at this stage in the season, is it safe to say the 25 is kind of not better than the 24? I think that was basically what he was asking. And there wasn't a flat denial. Normally manufacturers, they don't like that. They'll stick up for the latest bike and everything else. Of course, he pointed out quite rightly, well, look at what Marc's doing. But I think there's no doubt, the 25, there's two sides of this, isn't it? Pecco needs to be closer to his teammate. Digia also, whatever bike you're on. But we're not seeing, I think, the benefit of the 25 over the 24, even now. So, I think there's a lot of work ahead for Ducati, for Pecco. Is this the light at the end of the tunnel? Barcelona will be a big weekend, I think.
Yeah, Lewis, anything to add to that?
I think Uccio Salucci made quite an interesting point as well about, specifically about Pecco, but he did reference Digia as well, his rider. One of the reasons I think that's maybe thrown Pecco off quite a bit is that Marc came from the 23 to the 25 with one bike that wasn't great in braking and corner entry to another bike that maybe isn't as good in corner entry and braking as the GP24, but is clearly a step above the GP23. So he's been able to click into that. And Uccio said as well that Digia had those enough troubles initially, but then at the start of the season they were able to kind of work on them. And there's been a few dips in form, but for the most part Digia has been pretty solid on it. So I think that's another thing to kind of take into consideration. But there is another one as well that, you know, Enea Bastianini spoke about this. He was asked, you know, what changes have been made to the bike, and he's like, you know, we tried this change, that change, turned the bike upside down. But there gets to a point where if nothing's working, you're the problem. And, you know, I think there is that kind of element that, you know, Pecco sometimes has been like, yeah, I've done, you know, I need to change, but he's not kind of been fully committal as to be like, okay, we've done all this to the bike, so the last thing to change is me. And, you know, I think that's the thing that Ducati will need to drill in as well, is, okay, we can make all these big changes, but you do need to meet us halfway.
I just got a notification, by the way, if you see me looking, Jonathan Ray's just announced his retirement, so he has, at the end of this year. So, yeah, we'll cover that on Christ.net. Sorry to sidetrack there. I was just checking my phone, and yeah, JR has announced his retirement. So, yeah, if you're interested in World Superbike, head across and we'll have all that for you. But, yeah, let's see what happens with Ducati and their Mystery 25. It's such an odd package. But, yeah, Marc Marquez seems to like it, and yeah, Di Gianantonio, I think he likes it, but it's more just consistency, a window. And with Pecco, I think it's just, if you've made the step now, let's see what you can do. And this is more of a, as you say, a test for now to the end of the year into 26. So yeah, plenty to cover, gents. I think we've done a good job of that, and yeah, there's more stuff to cover throughout the week, and I'll do my own separate video on who I think is the standout in the second half of the year. I think that there's plenty of interest for Jorge Martin, and I think people are wanting more stuff with him, so I'll cover that. So, well, yeah, an okay weekend overall. Could have been worse, could have been better, but, you know, let's see what happens with Hungary. I think it kind of got a lot of negative press, and there was some negative aspects of this weekend, but it was good in the lower classes. I can't complain about that. I mean, Moto 3 was brilliant. Moto 2 was even better. And I think David Alonso and Max Quiles holding their end up on that bargain. They put on a show for everyone. So, yeah, those classes are definitely worth watching, even if you think sometimes MotoGP might be boring. Stick for the lower classes, because that's where the real juice is at. So it is. Yeah, if you enjoyed this podcast, like, subscribe. Comment what you thought of the track, what you think of Mark, what you think of Martin, what you think of Pecco. Let us know anything. Drop them in there and we'll give them a read. Listen on Apple, Spotify. 5-star review as always. Helps us out massively. And we'll see you next week for the Barcelona preview.